All right. Grant, Rusty, I saw yesterday that Michael Taylor, the developer working with Chia's data layer, posted some new developments with regards to the data layer. And in the interview with Bram yesterday, we obliquely mentioned data layer, but we didn't get too much into what's being developed there. Grant, can you I don't do, I'm sure you caught Michael's post. Can you bring us up to speed on what happened there?
Well, Datalayer was originally released for Climate Action Data Trust, and it works pretty well for it. There's essentially some amount of support that is in place to do the kind of things that Michael was looking at doing. But I think he started to run into some limitations on how it functioned. Particularly, it didn't allow for a bunch of different use cases, like running a lot of data into the system, using it as an offer file or using it in conjunction with an offer file. So being able to say, if you were to create a certain state of data layer, you'd be able to pay someone for that particular state. And that allows you to do some fairly interesting use cases with respect to how you can monetize data. Because if you think about what data layer is essentially, it's like a database that you put that lives right next to the official blockchain database. And fundamentally, what you're doing is changing the state of that database over time and then putting markers in the actual blockchain that say, here's the correct state of that database. And essentially what that allows you to do is put some data that's immediately adjacent to the blockchain. I think what they found was through the course of working with how data layer was set up for climate action data trust, it just didn't consider some more broad use cases. Like, it works well for the very limited use case of what climate action data trust was trying to do. But when they tried to generalize that to do more interesting things like put big data onto some data store or operate high-speed oracles or do certain types of things with NFT collections, they encountered a bunch of limitations that once it became clear that it was the Chia Lisp essentially that was holding it back, then they created some new smart contracts to enable the same kind of data layer use case, but in a more robust and expanded fashion. So this particular project, what's happening is they've created essentially data layer 2.0.
And when you talk about I don't know, the problems that they saw outside of the limited use of CAD Trust, that had to do specifically with how to incentivize people to propagate data to host that data and monetize them for hosting that. Is that correct? Is Am I remembering that correctly?
So this was the chip that got authored by Yakuhito. So he's working with Michael Taylor together. Um, they created the specification, and I think Yak did a lot of the programming for it. So essentially, it kind of boils down to what's in this abstract. So if you're looking for this, the link will be in the description of the show. But essentially, it describes here what you can do and why you might want to do it, right? So it's kind of well summarized here. That you can say that there's more capabilities for how you can interact with the data layer owner puzzle, and that you can do certain things when you're starting to make offer files for specific types of conditions within what that database looks like. And then it talks more about some of the backwards compatibility with how things are working. So this really does a pretty good job of summarizing how the whole thing works and goes into fairly exhaustive detail about what's happening. And this just got released recently, so probably would be a good target for us to have. If these guys want to come and talk about this stuff in more detail, we could have it in a very specific and focused space or show just dedicated to talking about this piece of technology. But I think since it was released yesterday, it's a good chance to mention it. Some of the stuff that we talked with Bram about with respect to how Datalayer works from a distribution perspective, I think that that's potentially still there to be revisited, because a lot of the infrastructure that was built for Datalayer was this discovery of peers and how do you actually connect to a swarm of individuals that would have the data that you're interested in. And I think initially they were doing that through a thing called like a decentralized internet gateway, like a dig node. But the whole peer-to-peer swarm discovery thing, I'm pretty sure that's still all using that initial code that was written for Climate Action Data Trust. And I was a little surprised to hear that BitTorrent was never considered, or that the fundamental technologies around BitTorrent were never used. Because I know that some of the stuff that they ran into with the internet gateway nodes was how to actually punch holes in people's routers, and that's kind of all solved inside of BitTorrent because they have some code that automates all of that stuff.
Interesting. I was also surprised to hear that more hadn't been drawn from BitTorrent, but maybe Michael Taylor was maybe he drew from BitTorrent. I would love to have Michael Taylor on, and Yakuhito. It's fun talking to Yak with his warp.green project. And I mean, I think Datalayer is also one of the things that really excites me about Chia. The notion of self-hosting and breaking the cloud, getting away from the cloud, and I think in limited cases it is one of the growing alternatives that we see. Are you laughing at me? Dude, are you laughing at me when I say break the cloud, Grant?
No, I was actually pulling up another site to talk about how this works, because I think it's important to understand some of this stuff technologically.
Sure. Tell me about universal plug and play.
Yeah, so this is a way that you can interact with your router. So essentially you can write some code that says, hey, I'm about to do a interactive style interaction on the internet. So it's where you need to be able to exchange information, not just client server. Usually this is what you're doing. Like if I go to a website, there's some publicly addressable server that's sitting somewhere, and its intention is for people to come to it and ask it for things. So when you visit a web page, you're hitting a server somewhere, you're the client, your client does a request, and then the server responds, and you get a web page or something that you put on the screen. When you want to do an interactive peer-to-peer thing like BitTorrent, you need to establish a connection between two what would otherwise be not servers. They're peers, but they don't just sit there on the internet waiting for some client to connect. So you have to be able to establish that bidirectional networking channel. And the way that you would traditionally do that would be to make your own computer or server, essentially, by opening up communication channel on your router. Well, most people don't know how to do that. Like that's just not something they routinely do. You don't log into your home cable or internet provider router and start making a bunch of changes. Like some people are geeks and they do that, but a lot of people with that would just be beyond their normal capacities. So what Universal Plug and Play does is it says, if I have a program and it's going to start doing that bidirectional communication stuff, then I can write some code that says to the router, hey, I'm going to be, operating on this particular port. So make sure that you route traffic to me correctly. And if you look at any torrent client that you might use, you'll see, if you look at the logs, it'll start saying some stuff like opening up ports and doing universal plug and play and UPnP, this and that and the other thing. And that's also that when you start to connect to a BitTorrent swarm, that you have the ability to be in the swarm and have data routed to you and route data to other people. Because otherwise, you couldn't have this bidirectional communication. You could only get data from people who were publicly visible. You wouldn't be able to send data to anybody. And so you couldn't participate in the swarm correctly. And people couldn't easily send data to you because you're not routable. So that's what this whole thing is about, is it's about establishing that swarm. And Datalayer has that need.
Interesting. And I assume that, I mean, the reason that this is turned off, or that you have to turn it on or configure it manually, has to do with people trying to take over and use other computers for sending spam and other reasons. Is that why is that one of the issues that the routers are concerned with, or does that figure into it?
I mean, just by default, your router does not send traffic to anything. Like it's essentially there as a gateway for you to get out, but until you've established a communication channel with some server, you don't have the ability to get any inbound. And that's kind of desirable. I mean, why would you want anybody talking to any of your machines that weren't part of your network? Like that's not generally desirable. The only use case for something like that is if you have data that you're trying to share with other people, right? Like you put up some kind of a file server or a web server, and then you're hosting your own stuff, which is what the decentralized internet gateway and the decentralized internet purports to do. Like that's the stated goal, is to make this a decentralized internet. If you take that to heart, that means everybody's got to host some amount of data instead of relying on centralized players. So that's what this is fundamentally talking about, is being able to have decentralized data and file hosting and make that data available ubiquitously and generally on the internet. It's achieved through some stuff that they're doing on Datalayer, but ultimately you have to sort of solve these kinds of problems, which is how do you actually get those nodes routable? How do you get that data routable so people can get it from you? And that's what some of this BitTorrent and UPnP stuff, you need it for. Otherwise, you can't have that problem solved. So it's like they're doing part of the solution with Datalayer, part of the solution with these decentralized internet gateway nodes, and then fundamentally the technology that it needs to leverage is some of this UPnP stuff, so that you can automatically configure routers to be able to get access to these nodes that have the data you're interested in.
Good stuff. Have you ever dug into internet to peer protocol, I2P? Is that a dead movement in a precursor maybe to data layer, or are you familiar with it at all?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it. I can do a quick search and just throw it on the screen. I2P, huh?
Maybe it's not. It's probably, and I don't know enough about it to tell you about it. I know it was a movement for peer to peer internet, maybe 10 years ago.
Looks like something's still happening with it. New updates and stuff. I don't know.
Well, for
Is this the right thing? Does this look right? Invisible Internet Project?
well, I haven't heard it called the Invisible Internet Project, but yeah, I2P. It was a decentralized again. I'm very wary of the cloud, but not a developer like yourself, so I'm always curious about different solutions for breaking, for getting us out of under the constant thunderstorm that we live under today with the centralized cloud hosting, and the problems that come with it. So I2P is something that was on my radar for a while, and then I discovered Chia and Datalayer, and I thought it seemed to me that an association with a blockchain and the monetization aspect of it, the propagation coins, etc., might have a better ecosystem for flopping the way that we host information on the internet. So I don't know what else to talk about there. What else do we have on our topics for today?
Well, along these same lines, there's one thing that I saw that was very cool that fits right in with all of this kind of stuff. And I gotta show it because it's so cool. So these guys at I think they were at Bitcoin Nashville, and they were sending Bitcoin transactions over ham radio.
Oh, with they were waving semaphore flags. So somebody sent me a.
Well, look at this. So what they're doing is they've got these little ham radio peripherals. They hook it up to their smartphone, so they're using the ham radio as a communications channel, and then they broadcast a Bitcoin transaction across it. So I think they did a PBST, which is their effectively an offer file. So they did like an offer file thing that went across, and they did a Bitcoin transaction. Actually, I can't remember if they did the PBST, but yeah, they were doing a transaction over ham radio. So instead of using the internet to transfer data around, they're using the radio frequency network, the old school internet.
And with Morse code, I'm assuming.
No, not with Morse code. Just with just using this analog medium to encode a digital signal. I don't think it's Morse code. I think they did some other kind of encoding. I'd have to actually look that up, but it's not Morse code. No, definitely not.
Because Morse code could be intercepted. Is that why?
No, I mean you could definitely use Morse code. I just don't think it's an efficient way to encode it. I mean that would be super slow. I don't know how many bytes of information actually needed to be traded hands to do this, but Morse code would be a inefficient way to encode the data. You could do it that way, but that'd be like using Morse code to send somebody a hyperlink like HTTP, colon. That would take a long time to send via Morse code.
Well, maybe I guess in my mind, because I guess they sent a digital radio signal. I'm a bit confused there, because when you said ham radio, I went to in my mind I jumped to somebody sent me after our conversation with Gene that they had encoded a Chia offer file with the semaphore flags, so I was thinking that they had done this with an audible signal, a ... dash, but they sent a digital.
Well, this is no different than how we used to connect to the internet. I know that you're of an age that you remember using a modem. Remember that word?
Barely. 14.
Oh my gosh, are you serious? Like you never had like a dial-up internet?
I have modems sitting around me here. I was about to say I could reach over and grab an old 14.4K baud modem.
Okay, you had me nervous for a second there. I was like, no way. So yeah, that those old modems. Remember that screech that it was doing at the beginning? That dee 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 dee. That's the cascade to set up the handshake. That's the computers talking to each other digitally and saying, "Hey, let's exchange some data." And then whatever that screeching stuff that you would hear on your phone line, if you picked up the phone, like if your sister was using AOL and you picked up the phone and she's like, "Put the phone down, I'm using AOL." That's your computers talking digitally over an analog medium, and that's what it sounds like to the human ear. So if you were to do this over ham radio, it'd be just like when you're using an old analog phone line. No different.
I also know that they have ADSB, like advanced communications in aviation, that use Omni VOR radio now too. But I just don't know enough about. I just jumped to thinking about like an undigitized audio transfer. I thought they were going as old school as possible with the ham radio. It's interesting. Do you get into how our digital communications with sound differ from the old analog? Because when I was a kid, I could go even before those internet, when we had analog phone lines, and I grew up on a party line. And I didn't realize it until I was older, I had a sound engineer once explain to me what was happening with the compression of digital audio and the removal of so many aspects of a sound wave that then lead to mental exhaustion whenever we listen to all of these digitally compressed audio files, as opposed to the old analog files that were that our brain did not have to decode. Do you ever get into that sort of aspect of digital compression? I know you're into music too.
Yeah, as an audio file for sure. Although I'm not, I think the mental exhaustion I think came more from the loudness war and over compressing things, right? If you listen to the older recordings that were put on CD, and then you see that things that got digitally remastered and re-released, with high fidelity, whatever, they get access to their masters. I think Steve Albini was famously complaining about this, or was accused of this, that he just pushed the the waveform as big as possible so that it would sound super loud when you put it in. And usually if it's louder, it sounds better, right? So if you don't crank it up, then you're going to be missing a lot of the waveform just from the fact that you probably can't hear it. A lot of people are slightly deaf, but yeah, they pushed the waveform, and it chopped a lot of the nuance out of it, but it made the waveform like very full and very loud. So loudness war, I think, from what I remember seeing, contributed a lot to that fatigue.
Well, I've wondered because it was over 10 years ago that I had, friend who's sound engineer like sit me down and explain to me that my ears were not my ears were actually decoding it, because I just mentioned offhand how I didn't like to talk on the phone, and it was tiresome to me, and it was weird that when I was a kid I would, well, I was the type of kid who would pick up the phone at all times of the day to listen to other people on our party line, and then I'd just sit there and listen. But I also remember my
But here's what I was talking about. See how the waveforms just get pushed?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's like you have this band, and see if you chop off all this extraneous stuff, well, like what some people would consider extraneous, then you can push this fuzzy middle more, and it just becomes almost unlistenable in a way that it originally had a lot of dynamics. See, like you get this range, you have this fuzzy middle, but you have a lot of highs and lows. As you push it, you chop all that stuff out. Like you make it louder by default, but you lose all that nuance, and that's what was contributing to the listener fatigue, was this loudness where I can't remember exactly who was responsible for this, but there was like a couple of producers that started doing this, and pretty much everybody followed suit.
I'm trying to think of the producer's name, but I can't think of it. The guy who wasn't it the guy who shot his wife? Was it Phil Spector? I don't know. I don't know. We need Aleph here to answer those sort of questions. There's Rick Rubin. God, love Rick Rubin. Do you know what I'm talking about? Was it Phil Spector who was he the guy behind the wall of sound?
Ha! You were right. It was Rick Rubin.
Okay, it was Rick Rubin, but Rick Rubin also was on the heels of, I think, of Phil Spector. Look up Phil Spector, Phils.
Yeah, that he was referenced in this Loudness War 2 thing. Like he's one of the only other people that's mentioned here.
Yeah. Yeah. Rick Rubin.
Yeah, look, see the so-called wall of sound. Oh no, they're talking about the song.
Oh, and
No,
not
maybe
to
not. Nope. No Phil Spector in the Wikipedia page.
Hmm.
Just Rick Rubin.
Gotcha. Well, Phil Spector's biography is a pretty crazy one to consider. Kind of a maybe more interesting than the Wall of Sound, maybe not. But
reminds me of the Pixies' Planet of Sound.
I never listened to the Pixies. That was not.
I miss playing music on this show. It's strangely, to take a quick turn into copyright. I was listening to some of the old things that we had done where we used to start the FOMO show with music, and it seems like some of it's been scrubbed out because if you listen to some of those older ones that we've got, and hopefully we can get those loaded up onto the archive YouTube channel one of these days. That all the beginning music that we played has been replaced with the what's it called? The Space's default music.
The,
So
to,
all that talk that we had about copyright and whatever, looks like X finally decided they didn't want that in their archives.
oh, that's a bummer. And even worse that they replace. I'd rather they replaced it with silence than the atrocious elevator music that that they give for offerings. I could, I think about that sometimes with X and other things. Why is there no why aren't they reaching out to various artists who would be glad to be getting their music in front of an audience?
I thought this was supposed to become the everything app. Where I've seen like zero features come out from X, really, other than we had spaces, and I think there was already streaming video when Elon got it, right? So like these things were already in place because Twitter didn't buy that Vine or whatever the hell it was.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think they bought
their
Vine.
their focus has been on Grok and AI, and I mean, it seems to me their focus has been on Grok, AI, and um, reading
Yes,
and
yeah.
summarizing the content that's being being tweeted out.
I thought this was going to be the everything app with payments and you could monetize, and there was all this promise about
Yeah,
what X could
well,
become, and none of those things came about. That's so
well,
disappointing.
they're not they're not done yet, because we've mentioned that we're going to be discussing soft war with Lowry's MIT thesis next week, and I actually got started reading it yesterday after the show. And one thing that I actually thought about was Twitter and some of the ideas that I had heard through the grapevine that they were going to be incorporating, and that I was not surprised. So I think that they have been waiting for both like legal clarification and have had other issues. Elon Musk, by the way, is moving all of his exes are headed to Texas. Um, and I thought that was not like an inconsequential or merely just a culture, a a complaint of California culture, or Delaware culture, but I think that it has also probably to do with probable like closer relationships we'll see between like the ecosystems of Starlink, Tesla, and X, and also having some more political input as to legislative permissions, as to laws that will allow some of the things they want to create together. So, but I don't think X is done, and he always wanted to have a payment app to begin with. So that now we've gone way afield. By the way, I see one of my favorite bands and favorite albums is staring right here. The Flaming Lips at War with the Mystics. I don't know if I ever played anything by the Flaming Lips, but they have some of the best shows that have ever been created. They're incredible.
You'll get no argument out of me. Flaming Lips are like the modern day Grateful Dead, in my opinion.
Oh, I'm so glad. I was going to ask. I was going to say, are you don't hate the Flaming Lips, do you?
How can you hate the Flaming Lips? The Flaming
I
Lips are a fantastic band.
I meet a bunch of people who question my devotion to the Flaming Lips.
You know what I have to say about that is if you say you hate the Flaming Lips, then you have to say, well, what albums do you specifically hate? Because they're so diverse in their, output. Some of their albums are extremely experimental. Some are super poppy. Some are super metal. I mean, it's like you can't say you hate the Flaming Lips unless you just fundamentally say you hate Wayne Coyne, what he sings about, and you think he has a whiny voice. Like, okay, valid criticisms there, but otherwise, if you can say you like his voice and you don't hate it, then you got to tell me which albums you don't like specifically, because I think Hit to Death in the Future Head is one of their crowning achievements, but I really like Rock and Roll.
I don't know. Hit the Death in Their Future Head. I think maybe it was at a time in an earlier YouTube when there was when the Flaming Lips had sort of an outsized. I don't know if you remember the hell. I don't even remember which song it was, but where Wayne is dressed up as a hamburger and Hit the Death in the Future. Well, that's a very early one. I was
Yes, this is really early Flaming Lips, but it's really good. So, highly recommend this one.
I've mentioned that in when we did used to talk about music, how much I pay attention to where bands are from. Do you know where the Flaming Lips are from?
They're from Wyoming, right?
No, they're from Oklahoma City.
Close enough. That's the same state.
Oh my God, those are fight right there.
Those are the same state. Like anything over there, undescribed Western territories. Like, isn't that how it's described in Risk? Yeah, it's like Western territories.
Oh my God. Well, now we're talking about Risk. Oklahoma is very different than Wyoming. I don't know how many Okies would approve of Cynthia Loomis, and Liz Cheney. We have our own understanding of the world from dear old Oklahoma. But yeah, the Flaming Lips are from Oklahoma City, and I think always have been. Never forsook it. Like those that band. Now I can't even think about who used to be from Albuquerque and picked up and moved to Portland when they had one famous album.
So somebody who is a huge presence in the Flaming Lips has been that guy Steven Drozd, or however you pronounce his last name. You know who I'm talking about?
No, I don't. Who is he?
Well, Wayne Coyne, right? So
Yeah.
So
I'm surprised Wayne's brother's not on there. Where's Wayne's brothers? Stephen Draws.
This guy, he is considered to be the most influential and important person that ever joined the Flaming Lips. So like once he joined, it sort of changed the Flaming Lips. So he joined in '91, I think, which all the really important albums that you think about from the Flaming Lips like have that sound because of Steven Draws. But like the one I was talking about, he's not in it. So some of that newish sounding, what happened to the Flaming Lips after '91 was all because of this guy.
The soft bulletin, which I see on the bottom, that was my introduction, or when I fell in love with the Flaming Lips, was the soft bulletin. All those bugs bugging around in the air. I mainly what I know about the
Flaming this was critically acclaimed. Like when they did this, it was like, oh, the Flaming Lips are the new Pink Floyd. Like that's what this album was.
Well, that was also at a time,
and then Yoshimi came right hot on the heels of it with very similar graphics, very similar types of spacey whatever. It's almost like a double album in some sense.
Yeah, and again, that was like when the soft bulletin and Yoshimi Battles the Robots came out. They're just was so different than the Pink Robots. I don't know. They're so much better than the same boring lyrics and the same boring.
See here's Steven Drozd and
Steven Drozd.
Yep, and then you'll see it again. It's like he was here for this one. See, it's like Steven Drozd.
Yeah. Well, I thought Wayne's brother was in it too. Did he drop off the Flaming Lips?
I don't know about that. I thought they started their own band, didn't they?
Maybe. Do you know Oklahoma City has a massive underground mall?
No.
Yep, it does. And which also used to I mean, part of my fascination too with the Flaming Lips was that they were from Oklahoma City, that it was, you know, one of the town, we in Oklahoma we just call it the city, and we would go there to for shopping or whatever. But there was this massive old underground development, underground mall. I don't know the whole story of it, but um, in a pre or an early internet world, it was I don't know, like a mystical place, of like Barter Town, was how it felt. But anyway, we've talked enough about the Flaming Lips. Although I love it, let's talk about Venezuelan coup.
All right. You want to throw something on the screen? What do you want to show about that?
Over in our private chat, I put a link, BT Newsroom.
Okay, I got that one.
And maybe it is a good segue to talk about the Flaming Lips, because another thing that I always loved about the Flaming Lips is, you know, when it came to Bush and the war with Iraq, they were the Flaming Lips were sort of an alt, like underground band that complained about things that were going on in America, and it was hard to put words to at a time. But after Yoshimi, in the early Bush years and the wars with Iraq and Afghanistan, they turned into a much more overtly political band. You know, if you could blow up the world with a flip of a switch, would you do it?
I thought it better not to fight. I thought there was a virtue in always staying cool.
Oh, that's one of my favorite fight tests. That is one of the greatest. And again, like, there's part of the narrative of the Flaming Lips that is so beautiful in sort of like understanding that, um there's like a schoolyard bully, and the different ways to deal with a schoolyard bully or to be different, that the Flaming Lips show that you can focus on your own world, or but you don't have to fight. And
Wow, I got the exact opposite out of that. To me, it seemed like he was lamenting the fact that he was trying to do this, but like that there are times when it's just, you got to stand up for yourself and you actually have to engage in violence. I thought that's what he was trying to say there.
uh, but I think he was, well, I thought they were making like the case that that's the that's not supposed to be your initial reaction. Um, so, or not the only reaction. But anyway, I didn't.
Anyway, what about Venezuela? So we've got this thing on the screen. What's going on here? There was a coup attempt. This is backed by
So
the United States, and didn't Michael Bolton, not the Michael Bolton that's the singer, but the UN ambassador during what it was the Obama years, I think, right? Didn't
you
that
mean,
guy say I tried to overthrow Venezuela?
I didn't catch that. I thought, do
What?
you
Really?
mean Michael McFall or
Michael Bolton.
Michael Bolton?
Let me see if I can find it.
See if you can find it. So I just noticed a couple of days ago that all of a sudden Venezuela was popping up all over, X, with regards to, the election that occurred there, and I could hear a lot of complaints about the lack of democracy in Venezuela. And we have been covering Venezuela here for quite some time. We talked about them opting to go with Tether to get around U.S. sanctions with regards to the United States trying to limit their the sale of their oil. We talked about the Venezuelan support for Julian Assange that happened for quite some time, and also, I mean, going back to the Flaming Lips.
Okay, wait. So let me play this clip because
Okay,
this is
play it.
pretty
Go
cool.
ahead and play it because I haven't heard it.
Somebody who has helped play with that. I don't know that I agree
John
with
Bolton.
To be fair, with all due respect, one doesn't have to be brilliant to attempt a coup?
I disagree with that. As somebody who has helped plan coup d'etat,
Yeah.
not here, but other places, it takes a lot of work, and that's not what he did.
When we were talking about what is capable, what you need to do to be able to plan a coup, and you cited your expertise having planned coups.
I'm not going to get into the specifics, but
Successful coups?
well, I wrote about Venezuela in the book, and it turned out not to be successful. Not that we had all that much to do with it, but I saw what it took for an opposition to try and overturn an illegally elected president.
I don't know that I agree with.
Oh, you really want to stir me up? That's John Bolton, not Michael Bolton. You can tell.
Oh, I got the name slightly wrong. Michael Bolton, John Bolton, they're all Bolton.
I mean, that mustache never dies. John Bolton is the war hawkest of war hawkest advisors to enter the White House. He always disgusts me. His belief and reliance on might, and his subversion of the narrative. You have a problem with the democratic election in a foreign country, and so you're going to create a coup. This man is disgusting. Absolutely.
Well,
disgusting.
I like how he said we didn't have that much to do with it, but yet is admitting that like the U.S. had something to do with it. Like, I don't know what that means. Not much, but it sounds like something.
And they had a hell of a lot more to do with it than he's admitting to here. They also again, going to the collapse of the dollar as the denominator of world trade that we're seeing today goes right back to our sanctions. And oops, dogs are barking here. That's because they see John Bolton on the screen and they understand how upset he makes me. We use sanctions to begin to block Venezuela years and years ago, and again it goes back to Hugo Chavez and his. He did not support Bush and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. He could see very much representing a country that had massive oil reserves and that had nationalized their oil reserves to take them out of consideration for usurpation by international companies. He could see what the United States was actually up to in the Middle East. There's GW. And he, like the narrative in the United States is that Hugo Chavez was a terrible communistic leader, and he did make seemingly some, I don't know, short-sighted and unfair attempts, but it's not an easy road to buck the world and also to be taken out of international trade. So anyway, that's a little bit of the background going into Venezuela. Maduro was a I don't know if he was in the military under Chavez, but he was the picked leader by Chavez after Chavez passed away, and that's who was up for election. I think it more important too. If the notion of the United States is that we want to see democracy in the rest of the world, even though we're not a democracy ourselves, we're a democratic republic, we do still have an electoral college, and we are a commerce-based union of sovereign states, and that's a tension that the likes of John Bolton like to point out within the United States, and then turn around and talk about their expectations of not just democratic but absolute democracy, one man, one vote in other countries. And they like to do so because they like to overthrow the regimes in these other countries when it's expedient for them to do so in order to put up the resources of those countries on the table for exploitation by international companies that are probably registered or based out of the United States.
On a slightly lighter note, do you think that we could start resolving major conflicts by one-on-one cage matches? Because it seems like almost all of our elected leaders and the CEOs of major companies now want to resolve their conflicts via cage match. So I think we've actually come full circle on this, because This used to be the way that nations would resolve issues, right? They would say, well, we'll have a fight of each of our champions and then go into the ring, and one person comes out dead, and then we resolve border issue or trade issue or whatever by, blood sport.
You know,
the new karate combat.
I think you're a little bit onto something. But the championship in the ring, the David and Goliath, that is the old method, old alternative to war settlement. I think what we're more likely to see is Venezuela put up their soccer team and say, we'll play in a soccer match for that. So yeah, trial by combat. That's that old feudal system that everybody wants to get away from. But,
now let's bring this back. It's time. If we're gonna have robots and drone strikes and whatever, like, this is a more honorable way to do it. Like, if
next you're gonna tell me that WWE is real. That's
well, if we're gonna talk about Aaron Burr getting shot by or Alexander Hamilton getting shot by Aaron Burr, we got to start talking more about tribal combat.
I mean, and look at what a martyr it made Alexander Hamilton, and nobody remembers poor old Aaron Burr, who started.
Right, but look, I mean, isn't Maduro stumping for this? Like, why is he calling out Elon Musk and challenging him to a cage match, and then Elon Musk accepts? Like, what are we doing here?
Well, he's putting a message out and getting a message across, and I don't know what sort of influence. Again, talking about these massive international companies who are also exerting their values in various countries in the world where they have no stake. We talked earlier about the failed coup by Zuniga, a general in Bolivia, against the president Luis Arce. And Arce immediately afterwards said this had 100% to do with the lithium contracts that we just signed, and some corporations did not get access to the lithium in Bolivia, and are very upset about that. And that was on the heels of Argentina. And I also listen to all these libertarians and conservatives who tell me what a novel and brilliant person Javier Milei is. And I just say, how novel and brilliant is he if he goes out in the street and yells and talks about capitalism, and then turns around and runs inside to the Casa Rosada and takes money hand over fist from the IMF and accepts all of the strictures from the IMF that everything in Argentina must be priced according to the deals that are created via international trade. And so, sells or gives away, depending on how you want to look at it, sells all of the Argentinian assets in somebody else's money. So I think that Nicolas Maduro is trying to do what's best for Venezuela. I think that the narrative about the election there does not hold up. Whenever we think, we have all of these concerns about the vote and the election in the United States. Let's look at the vote and the election in Venezuela. You have to show ID to vote. The votes are both recorded on paper and electronically. The complaints about the vote there have come from an exit poll that was produced an hour after the elections by an NGO associated with the top American propaganda wings, like Voice for America, Voice for Freedom, and other organizations that the United States has used to overthrow or to change the narrative in various countries around the world since the Cold War, since World War II, and even during it. So that to me is more important to consider, and it's also more important to consider what's happening in the Middle East right now, and not just with the failure to rein in Israel with angering all of their neighboring countries there. But even leading into the Israeli-Gazan conflict, we had already seen the OPEC changed the price of oil back in January without consulting the United States, and that had never happened before. And the United States control on the price of oil in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia has gone further and further and further downhill. Think of Khashoggi, the beheading and dismembering of Khashoggi at the behest of Mohammed bin Salman, the heir apparent and crown prince of Saudi Arabia, and how the United States did nothing. All of our talk about democracy and counting all the votes. The United States did nothing about that, and that was a reporter for the Washington Post and possibly a United States citizen. I forget if he was or not. But the United States did nothing about that. And why did they do nothing about that? Because in reality, we consume and use a lot of oil, and our politicians campaign and talk about keeping the price of oil low, and they might chant "drill, baby, drill," but the first place that they look to drill is anywhere but in the United States. And that has to do with, sure, if you're going to drill, baby, drill in the United States, and we have minimum wage laws and various other regulatory structures about that, I don't know how much cheaper it's going to make oil. And whenever in the past we've been drill, baby, drilling in all these other countries and suppressing the cost of labor and the price of resources in those various countries. So this is why I look at Venezuela and say this has a disgusting imprint of the thumb of the United States trying to secure more cheap resources.
Okay, cheap maybe, but I'm going to keep coming back to this and say the United States produces more oil than any other country. So I get it that we want to trade our worthless fiat for other countries' commodities. And, I think that there's a narrative there, but to say that we need it, I think is still to be pretty disingenuous about the amount of oil production here. And the whole drill, baby, drill, it's like, we're already drill, baby, drilling. That never stopped. Like, that's been going on.
Well, also
Obama, Biden, Trump, and it's not gonna change anytime soon.
Well, you need to also consider and bring into bear like what the use of oil is in the United States, or the use of petroleum, because I'm pretty sure ours is higher than anybody else's also. And
of course, because we're the biggest economy. We were the first to industrialize on a hydrocarbon economy. So yes, I think there's no surprise that we use more than anybody else because we pioneered that.
Well, there's also like not all extraction is the same, and we rely heavily on fracking in the United States. A lot of the oil that we are drawing is deeper or in rocks or reservoirs that are both deeper or hard to access, and fracking has given us the ability to reach a lot more petroleum in the ground, but it also has issues. We've had, Dallas, Texas just had an earthquake that was a 5 on the Richter scale, and I believe they had 3 in a week. Oh, Oklahoma, where they had extensive amount of fracking in eastern Oklahoma, has 300 earthquakes a year now, and anyway, we have other things to talk about. I just say be wary of the narrative of what's going on in Venezuela. Look at how the election was conducted, and also ask yourself if the United States is sponsoring coups, is blowing up pipelines in Germany, is starting wars with Russia and everyone else. Again, is it better to fight? I thought it better not to fight. Citgo is a relation of the Petrobras, or the Venezuelan oil company. But we were also going to we're running out of time here. We were going to talk about the also.
I don't think we can get to it. We got 5 minutes and we pretty well exhausted it just on these three topics. I guess we hadn't anticipated taking a hard left into the American alt rock band that is the Flaming Lips. So unfortunately, we'll have to save the women's sport thing for a different day. And I think I got a typo in there anyway.
I don't see the typo. Well,
Biological met.
Biological. What was it supposed to be?
Men.
Oh, okay. I'm reading a lot here. Well, we'll pick up that subject at some point later. Tomorrow we have a friend of mine, a Tunisian, a Tunisian. I don't know, what do you say? A Tunisian, a friend of mine who I lived in Austin, Texas with for many years, and who has been back in Tunisia. He came to school at the University of Texas for a couple of years. But I called him up the other day to ask if he would be interested in coming on the show to bring us a perspective from North Africa, from Tunisia, with everything that's going on, the political situation in Israel, in the Middle East, in the hegemony,
and Lebanon.
Lebanon, now also Iran. There's been a lot going on there. I spoke with my friend.
I hope the conversation won't be timely, because I think during that show we'll be in the middle of that 48-hour thing, right? Didn't Iran say they were going to respond in 48 hours to whatever occurred?
I didn't catch the time window. That might been an implication that was placed on them. They issued a statement with regards to a warning to Israel that if Israel carried out any military actions in Lebanon, that they would respond. And Israel responded by assassinating a leader of Hezbollah in Iran. And a couple of hours later, another assassinated another leader.
I remember what it was. It was that the United States intelligence community say that there would be a strike from Iran in the next 48 hours. So that's what.
Well, and always bear in mind, because the United States intel community is obviously, as we listened to John Bolton state earlier, sometimes looking to change the narrative. So I think it's important to listen to what Iran says and how they conduct their actions, because if when they sent a drone strike into Israel earlier this year, they made sure to call NATO and announce publicly that they were going to do so and what it was in retribution for before they did so. We also have seen, related to this, we've seen Russia. I don't know if you saw Putin's remarks yesterday that there is that now we have come to a point where there will be an unavoidable war in that region, and that there could be no political stability without a war, and only a shaky political stability following that. So I do think we're going to see other things happening there. On a related note too, did you see that the Biden-Harris administration came to a plea deal with 3 of the detainees? Isn't that a funny word? It's only been 20 years. The 20-year detainees in Guantanamo.
I did not see that. That sounds like a great preview for tomorrow, though, because I think we got to roll out. So great conversation today, and we'll look forward to getting some perspective from outside the U.S. again. Love those shows. I think they're always a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think you'll really enjoy my friend's perspectives, and he's an interesting guy. So, and sometime let's turn and have that conversation about men and women's sports, because I want to talk about steroids and drugs and all sorts of things on top of that. But we'll get to that at another point. I enjoyed it. I will see you tomorrow.